Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be looking at the English opening from White's perspective. And since the opening is so broad in scope, we are only going to be considering the variations beginning with the move 1c4 and after Black's response, 2g3. So as you see on the board right here, this video is being done due to a request, and I know that the opening is so broad in scope. I was trying to figure out a way to try to trim it down a little bit and just go over some basic concepts using my miniature game method. So we're going to be going over, some rapid games in rapid fashion, and also all the other games are going to be under 30 moves. So again, as I say in my other videos, I believe this is the one of the best ways to learn the opening is to look at games which are complete train wrecks, and that way you can see the plans of the side that you're studying uh, executed, without a lot of resistance. And then once you understand the plans, then you can start looking at more competitive games. So we're gonna start with this game right here, and it's a player named Baconi versus a player named Silgazi, and this is from the Hungarian Championship in 1951. The English opening is usually played by more experienced players because it's a rich opening. There are tons of positional possibilities, and that's why it's hard to just do a quick video on the English opening and really do it justice, because you can end up in so many different openings, and also there's different plans, but I'll try to go over some of the main plans and hopefully you'll pick it up here. So let's give it a shot. So in this game you had c4, e5, g3, and like I said, that's all we're going to be looking at is situations where white plays 2g3, not 2c3 or anything else, but 2g3. So knight f6, bishop g2, c6, and white strikes immediately with d4. E takes d4, queen takes d4, and notice how white strikes in the center here with this queen, because now that c6 has been played, he's not really concerned about losing time with the move knight c6 hitting his queen. d5, knight c3, bishop e6 was played, c takes, and knight f3 now. And as you can see here, black already has an isolated pawn. Now, what's the purpose of Fianchetto on the bishop early? Well, the white bishop exerts tremendous power over the light squares. Okay, combined with the move c4, knight c3, the bishop on g2 exerts a lot of power on that diagonal and primarily through the light squares. And usually, depending on what black does, white will attack through those light squares and mount his attack on the queen side. This is usually the plan against a classical response by black. So if black just tries to put his pawns in the center, e5 and d5 respectively, knight f6, knight c6, and tries to go for a classical setup. White's response is usually a response where there's a vigorous attack against the center. Many times black can be left with the isolated pawn, as you can see here, or if the center is totally dissolved, then there's a vigorous attack on the black queen side. So knight c6 finally comes out, queen a4, queen b6, castle. Here's a scenario where you have opposite wing castling. Knight b5, d4, bishop f4, knight d5, rook ac1, knight takes f4. The game takes on a flavor of reverse Sicilian here. Knight takes a7, just exploiting the pin on the knight on c6. King d7 captures the piece. Now bishop d6, knight takes c6, b takes c6, and here's a killer blow right here from white. Rook takes c6, and this is totally exploits the position of the king and queen, and also demonstrates the power of this bishop and the latent power of this bishop. The bishop has been sitting there with this knight in front of it. It looks like it's not really involved in the game. And after rook a8, this queen takes a8 because white had to resign. The reason is because after queen takes c6, there's a simple discovered check here. The knight e5 check, forking the king and queen. And after bishop takes e5, we can see that the bishop on g2 assists the queen in delivering a fatal blow. Okay, so let's move on to our next game. Here is a next example from Mikhail Botvinnik versus a player named Otto Benker. And this is from 1956 Moscow Olympics. Again, c4, e5, g3, knight f6 here, bishop g2, d5. And here you'll see a different plan, or actually, you'll see a different plan here implemented by Botvinnik. So after the opening, a3, castle, b4. Here's the classical plan, usually associated with the English, which is this expansion on the queen side, basically holding black in the center and then expanding on the queen side, attacking the pieces and driving them away, which usually will weaken the center. So for instance, the knight is protecting this pawn here, and the expansion a3, b4, b5, with the idea of moving this knight away from the defense of the e5 pawn. This is an old school plan, and one that many associate with playing the English. a6, designed to stop the move b5, d3, bishop e6, knight e4, h6, and the purpose of h6 is black wants to play f5 without worrying about the piece coming to g5. So bishop b2, again, more pressure on the center. So now you understand that that's the purpose of a3, b4, not only to expand with the pawns over there, but also you can put a piece on b2 and attack the center. So f5, knight c5, bishop takes, b takes c5. So black has to part with this dark square bishop, leaving white the bishop pair. Drives the knight from b6. Rook c1, protecting the pawn. Queen e7. And now knight h4 here. Okay, so Botvinnik is not worried about this pawn here with the knight c5, because what happens then is bishop takes c6, and after b takes, then you have this situation here with this fork. So the knight h4, this fork on g6 has to be acknowledged, and notice how that was provoked because of the move h6. Queen f7, and now f4, e takes, and notice how the play has switched to the other side of the board. Now Botvinnik was playing on the queen side, and now he's switched his play over to the king side. This is another aspect of this opening. That's why I was saying it's very rich in possibilities. Now the G file is open, and you see the transfer of Botvinnik's pieces over to the king side. And notice again that bishop on b2, and that's going to be a real annoying piece, because this position is opening up in white's favor here. Notice how white has this open, semi-open G file, and he's just maneuvering his pieces over to the queen side. Great tactical shot by Botvinnik, getting rid of one of the protectors of G6. And what it does is it draws the queen on the E file. And notice that this knight here is not really protected too well. So after rook E1, queen takes F4, and then simply rook takes E7. All right, so we saw the play all across the board in this particular example. Here is another example from 1957, Alexei Sutin versus a player named Vorkina. And the game started out G3 but transposed after C4 and F5. So sometimes what you'll see, speaking of transpositions, is black will play a position that's similar to a Dutch defense, or sometimes the opening might just transpose all the way into some type of Dutch defense. Sometimes you'll have a reversed closed Sicilian, but sometimes it'll transpose into a Dutch proper. Okay, so here Sutin plays F4. Okay, so he's showing his desire where he might play on the queen side. Very provocative play here. And it pays off because after F4, black should probably just do a move which just strong points his E5 square. You know, this looks more sound. Let's play a move like D6 instead of what was played. After Queen B6, this allows black just to, white just to simply take on E5. I mean, it's tempting because you see the dark squares look pretty suspect, and you have the idea of knight G4, etc. And maybe it'll be a quick day at the office for black. However, white has different plans. So after F takes E5, knight G4, D4. Okay, so it blocks the coordination on that diagonal from G1 to B6. Now D6. He simply takes, E takes D6. And now black is already in trouble because if bishop takes D6, then simply C5. So bishop F6 is played. Knight F3. And we can see that black has no compensation. But I showed you this game because I wanted you to see what it looks like when white just plays in the center of the board. And we can see the pawns just marching up. Many times in these hypermodern openings, you know, the player that is playing classically is allowed to place his pawns in the center, only to have his center destroyed, and then at the end of the game you see the other player's pawns marching up the center. And here's a perfect example of that, and a beautiful example of that, if I might add. E6, knight fe5, and then you just see some exchanges, and just simply queen takes c6, which is just a brutal ending, as black is just about to lose everything in this position. Okay. Here's another example from Botvinnik, 1960 this time. So here is his famous Botvinnik variation in the English, where he plays the move E4. But again, notice the typical traditional setup, whereby if black plays Korchnoi in the center, usually white will go with this plan of just simply B4, B5, expanding on the center, utilizing this pressure from this powerful bishop on the light squares to get white to start compromising his queen side here. Bishop D7, B4, Queen C8, Bishop D2, castles H3, Knight D8. We can see black is keeping things real close to the vest. E3, and now Bishop C6, and he just wants to simply trade off this powerful light square bishop. So at this point, Botvinnik changes plans here, and he plays the move F4. I'm sorry, E4. So knight E6, knight GE2, knight H5, knight D5, and now bishop D8, and now castles from Botvinnik. Bishop D7, King H2, protecting the H pawn. C6, kicking the knight out. Knight E3, G6. So far so good from black. Good solid play, but all the pieces are on the board, and so now it's just a matter of who has better plans at this point. So now Botvinnik switches his play to the king side. Again, this is what I was talking about, not to be too repetitive, but the English is that type of opening where you might start out playing on one side of the board, and then depending on what your opponent does, you switch over to the other side. So here we see Botvinnik now playing f4. His opponent finally makes a mistake. Probably just e takes e4 was better. Instead, he plays bishop f6, and the reason why is because it kind of puts this bishop on a vulnerable square without protection. Knight g4 takes place. Now he plays e takes f4, but now he loses the bishop. Knight takes f6. Knight takes f6. Note again, this piece is unprotected. G takes h5. Queen e1, king h7, and now f5. Again, strategically now, black is lost. Notice how the dark square bishop for black is gone, but white has his dark square bishop, and there's all kind of weakness around the dark squares of black. Knight g7, queen comes in, knight g8. So black is desperately trying to, cover up these weak squares. f6 by white. Knight to g3. And now rook e8. d4. Rook e6, trying to win that pawn. And then Botvinnik just simply plays bishop g5 and went on to win this game. Okay, there's really no hope at this point to save this knight. Okay, the reason is if he plays knight e8, then knight takes h5. So he's just gonna drop a piece there. I wanted to show you this game right here between Nikola Spiridonov and Konrad Zudima from 1966 to show you what a typical plan might look like when white just concentrates his efforts on the queen side. So you can see here, classical play by black, just trying to create a solid center. And when this occurs, white must attack the center vigorously. You can't allow black to get settled with his pawns on the center. Okay, that's the rule basically in any hyper-modern system. You're allowing your opponent to occupy the center with those pawns, but that doesn't mean you get lazy and don't attack the pawns. You must attack the center vigorously. So knight c2 here, knight f6, castle, bishop e7, and now d3. So already some pressure there. Bishop f5. Black is doing what he can do to try to protect the center. Knight e3 is played. And now queen e6. Queen b3. More pressure on the center. And notice that this pawn is attacked also. So a lot of pressure from white. Black just castles. If b6... then just simply knight c3, putting more pressure here. And if d4 trying to go for a fork, then just simply knight takes f5. All right, and black is already losing there after queen takes and knight takes. Okay, queen b3 castle happened. Just took the pawn. Queen takes b7. A stronger master might even play knight c3, just piling up. Knight bd7. There goes the bishop. D takes, and again we see this example of this powerful bishop exerting pressure. Knight c3, again more pressure on the center. Bishop c5. The pawn just drops ingloriously. Knight takes f6, and just queen f3 offering the endgame. Of course, black can't afford that, just being down 2 pawns. b3, bishop f4. Attacking the rook, rook bc8, and rook fd1, and that was it. Black lost real, in a simple and basic manner. So that's like the typical, plan that white is trying to impose in that position. Here is an example from Paul Benko from Atlanta, 1967, against Ed Formashek. Now, this game right here is an example of when white just plays in the center, not really on the flanks at all. And again, this is all in response to what kind of game black is playing. So you have to be, have that in mind. That the English is not the type of opening that you could just whip out the first 10 moves and not think about it. So we have this situation where it's kind of, again, like a Dutch defense, right? It's like a Dutch defense on the black side, or a closed Sicilian in reverse. After, again, this game started out G3, E5, and C4 by transposition, D6, Bishop G2, and now you see F5, D4, E4, and now again, like I said in the last example, when black occupies the center with its pawns, the onus is on white to vigorously attack the center. You're trying to prove an argument that the early occupation of the center with pawns is weak. And we can see already the center has been dissolved quite rapidly. Black rather let it dissolve than try to defend it and it be exposed as a liability later on. So here we have now white just has a good position. Right, I can go on to the next game already, but I'll just show you the rest real quick. Like I said, the game look like a Dutch defense at this point. But I want to show you that what it looks like as white playing in the center. Again, typical Dutch themes where you had the weak E6 square. Many times it would be a pawn there or something, but here there's no pawn, just the square is weak. And black really has no counterplay here. Typically in the Dutch, you will see some counterplay on the, in form of some kind of kingside attack, or even some play in the center. But here, black just kind of has a bad version of a Leningrad. Knight C5. Oh, he's trying to reorganize his pieces, but it's just not working out for him. We see the occupation of the square there, and again we see this powerful bishop, right, just sitting there latent. And the reason why knight E6 is possible is because of this bishop right here. Okay. He plays rook E8. He really can't afford to take that. He would like to take it, but say if knight takes E6, D takes E6 with the fork, bishop takes E6, and then this bishop would remove this knight here from protecting D5, and now you see rook takes here, and hey, look who shows up to the party, the bishop on G2. This is why rook E8 has to be played. Bishop just drops on G7, and Palbenko just went on in a few more moves to win a nice game here. And this is where Formanek, I think I said Formacek before, Formanek resigned. Okay, now we're moving on to heavy hitter category with the top Grandmasters. Now, I know I showed a couple of Botvinnik games, but now this is nothing but Grandmaster games. And I'll try to go through quickly, not to make this video so long, but again, this opening is just, just has so many facets to it. It's hard to race through this opening with this short video. So here's a game from Petrosian from the Olympiad in 1972 versus Hans Ray, and this is a stereotypical example of playing the English. Right, so here you see the setup right here with the light square domination theme. There's A3 from Petrosian with the idea of expanding on the queen side. He secures his king side, right, from getting his bishop traded off. Like, these things you have to pay attention to, right? He doesn't want to just lose that bishop like that. So H3, knight H6, knight D5. Black has to be careful with moves, for instance, recastles or something like that. And getting attacked, on this F6 square. Moves like Queen C1, for instance, Knight F5 and G4. So Knight D8 is played. Knight g5 from Petrosian. Knight takes, bishop takes. Bishop a5. Again, notice the pressure on the queen side. This is like white's main kind of plan in this position. Notice how the bishop is left open so that it can be felt along this diagonal. And this is the purpose of having your pawns on c4, d3. Notice how the light squares are being dominated. White is not so much concerned about the dark squares right away at the beginning. It's more about a light square domination here. And you can see right now that black is starting to build up his attack over here against the queen side. So b6. So now you have some provocation of weakness. Right, the bishop is hit. The bishop can just move, however, but black's weakness is not so easy to mitigate. Bishop drops back, c6, knight c3, all provocative moves. So again, now we see some compromise on the black queen side. b4 now, a6, a4, knight f5. So black is hanging in there. There's some pressure against this position. Rook a1, rook a7, b5, a takes, now c5, rook a1, castles, rook d8, and Petrosian's gonna liquefy here. And this is what I'm talking about, the stereotypical plan of just attacking on the queen side. Look how strong this bishop is. Right? Black cannot occupy the A file, right, easily. This weakness in black's position gives white the opportunity to take over the A file and penetrate on the queen side. This is a move that black doesn't want to play, but he has to. He's trying to stop the penetration from the white pieces. However, the knight breaks the coordination between the queen and the rook here. And now you have just queen a8, queen c7. Again, desperately trying to hold things together. Queen c6. And now queen e7. Okay, if queen takes, then just simply b takes c6. And white's idea is simple, just to play rook a8 followed up by knight d5. Okay, just penetrating the position here. So queen e7 is played, rook a8. King h7, and then knight d5, and Hans Ray was forced to resign. So this game right here, so far, if you looking at this video, this game right here is a game that you definitely should go over again, like several times. Just a simple game, 30 move game, and this is kind of like the foundation right here, the English. Okay, let's keep going on. Like I said, we're in heavy hitter territory now. Here's the great Dane Bent Larsen at the Riga Interzonal 1979 versus Van Riemsdyk. Okay, g3 from Larsen, e5, c4 by transposition, knight f6, bishop g2, d5, c takes, knight c3. And I'm hoping that you're starting to get a hang of it, this opening by now. d3, bishop e7, knight f3. Knight c6 castles, bishop g4, so all classical stuff. Bishop e3 castle, and what plan is white going to choose here? a4. He chooses the same plan Petrosian chose, which is to keep it coy on the king side and just slowly pressure black positionally on the queen side. So he drives the pieces away. Knight takes d5, queen takes d5, and of course it's a tactical liability already due to this bishop right here that is so powerful. Larsen exploits that immediately, plays knight d4. Queen is being attacked, so the knight cannot be captured. So after queen d7, knight takes c6, b takes c6. So a big time breach in the black queen side here, and white is already substantially better. Queen c2, rook a b8, bishop takes c6. There was no real adequate way to protect that pawn. Queen e6, rook fc1, and you see the pile up on the c file. Another model game in the English. f5. Black tries to get some counterplay via kingside attack, but it's just too late. Black white has made too much progress on the queen side already. Okay, you can see his whole army is over there actually, right? All of white's forces are on the queen side of the board, and black can do nothing about it on the king side because his attack is just too slow. F3, just providing some extra security for white on the king side. Queen c4, notice offering the trade of queens, right? There will be no mating attack from black here. Queen takes, rook takes. Again, another model game in the English. Black resign. 23 moves. Okay, wash, rinse, repeat. Here's Bent Larsen again 2 years later at the Lone Pine Open in 1981 versus Vladimir Librazon. Same plan. Notice the queenside expansion of white. Kicks the pieces away. Notice how also Larsen keeps his bishop from being obstructed there. That's just another strategy. Okay, his idea is the same as Petrosian's earlier, is to penetrate on the queen side of the board. So he trades the c pawn, and now he fights for control over the d5 square. Okay, notice that he doesn't, he just doesn't trade just for the heck of it, but he's trading and not losing control of this square, and at the same time he's opening up the diagonal for his bishop. Notice how this knight is kind of stuck defending right now. It's either he has to stay there and defend or weaken his queen side. Again, typical response from black is that he has to have some type of counterplay. So he's weak on the queen side, so he goes for his king side attack. There it is. There's the concession. Okay, he needs to free that knight up, so he plays b6. However, this allows the penetration of white into the position to be a little bit easier. This queen a8. Remember again the Petrosian game. Knight f7. Queen c6. Rook d8. Knight e2. King h7. d4. Knight d6. Takes. Knight takes b5. Queens come off the board in a favorable ending for white, of course. Beautiful move by Larsen. The pin of the rook is decisive. Knight d6. E takes d6. B takes c6, and just simply bishop takes g7. Okay, the bishop cannot be captured because once the king is on g7, then the knight would just come here, check, and pick up the rook. I can't do this video on the English without including one of the great English players of all time, Viktor Korchnoi. This game took place in 1992 versus Oleg Romanishyn at the Rubinstein Memorial. Again, Korchnoi being an old school English player, he adopts some of the same plans we just saw Petrosian and Larsen use. Again, you see black with the typical counterplay on the king side. You see this Korchnoi neutralizes that play on the king side from black, expands in the center, and then he continues his harassment of black on the queen side, and black has already lost. Again, black tries to again, courageously counterattack on the queen side, but this is a hurtful move right here. That black, that white has. I mean, this amazing move by Korchnoi. I mean, he was already old too at this time, making moves like this. And Gavrikov might have. I'm sorry, Gavrikov. Romanishyn might have overlooked this move. I mean, but f takes g3, f takes g3 like it was nothing. And then rook f6 takes, queen takes, and then just c takes b7. And there's no way to stop the queen. That's the idea behind that combination. So again, the point is though, you see white pressing the play on the queen side and using this powerful bishop. Here's an example from Polish Championship in year 2000 between Tomasz Markowski and Alexander Wojtkiewicz. And this is a good example of what happens when play shifts to another sector of the board. So first we'll see white playing his typical plan on the queen side here. Drive the pieces away from the center. And notice also that that white never stops harassing the black in the center. So as soon as that knight is kicked away, you see the attack on the e5. Knight g5 has to be played. Knight takes, queen takes, bishop b2. Again, putting the piece here with this eye on the e5 pawn. Queen d8. Rook c1. Back to playing on the queen side. Notice the difficulty that this bishop poses for black on this diagonal. a4. Again, pressure on this pawn here. Bishop d6. Knight e4. Queen e4. Again, pressure on the center. Knight d7. Black tries a strong point this square. e5, rook fd1, h6. And now knight takes d6, getting rid of the bishop here. C takes d6, d takes e5. And now knight takes d5. Now something's wrong because black, of course, would like to play d takes e5, but the problem is white's play on the queen side is too strong. The rook c7. Right? What to do now about this situation? Okay, rook b8, for example, just to make like a null move, then bishop h3. So the queen has to get out of this pin. That would be met by b6, and notice the queen is still in the pin, but now from the d1 rook. So let's say rook e7. And now guess what? The pawn just drops, right? The pawn that black was trying so hard to protect. Queen e8, for example. And either bishop d4 or bishop d6, and white is just ahead. This is why black took with the knight, but now he has an isolated pawn here. h3, keeping the bishop, from coming here. Bishop e6. b6. What's the idea behind b6? Penetration into the queen side. It's a theme that we've been looking at, right? We saw it in Larsen's games and Petrosian's games, right? Either via the C file or the A file, right? But you'll see that move a lot. Knight to C4. And here black panics and he just falls for a tactical blow. I mean, he was worse anyway here. But here he plays good looking move, knight takes c4, but it just doesn't work out tactically because after rook takes c4, black is lost. The idea is if bishop takes c4, then queen g4, threatening mate here and threatening the bishop at the same time. So of course you have to protect against mate, so you drop the bishop. Again, another example, same idea. Player's name is Sturua, rated 2594 versus Zhu Jun, 2668. And this is from 34th Olympiad in the year 2000. So again, same opening, and we're gonna see the same idea where white has its typical beginning on the queen side, and then play is going to switch. So we already see bishop takes h7 there, and the rapid transfer of pieces to the queen side. Queen c8, good move by black. Wanting to trade the queens off, of course. g4, king g7 now, avoiding the discovery. Knight e4. Knight c4, and this is the type of positions where black has to be like extremely careful. Like one mistake here, like according to the engine, black may be equal, but one mistake here and it's a wrap. Okay, like it's hard to play a move like bishop takes d1 in this position, right? With your king looking at drafty. So knight c4 looks reasonable also, attacking the bishop. and white plays bishop c3. Okay, but bishop g8 is just putting white way in the lead. And the idea is after king g8, knight f6, king g7, and not knight takes e8, which is what black would sign up for that in a heartbeat. But d takes, and the idea is opening up this diagonal here. So for example, you can't really take here because the mate is threatened. So you have to play here, but this forces the king to be driven out. So now f4, and now this bishop is very powerful in this diagonal. Okay, and black would be lost there. But back to the game, bishop c3. So white was bluffed there a little bit, and now we have a game again. So knight d6, knight f6, knight takes b5. The bishop drops back again. The move bishop takes g6 is good here. Bishop b2, king takes f6. So the queen gets driven out. The king gets driven out by its own volition. King takes f6, feels that it's safe to take. D takes king e6. So that was the idea of black, to be safe behind this pawn, but unfortunately it did not work out. G5, king e7, e6, f takes e6, and then just bishop f6 check, and that will be mate in 5 moves if you want to mess around with that. Let's keep going. Here's Vladimir Georgiev versus Drasko from 2001. Again, we're going to see an oldie but goodie. We see again the idea of rapid expansion on the queen side from from white. And this is what happens when black doesn't really try to make a big deal out of taking over the center, but instead plays real solid like this, leaving the pawn on c7, playing d6, e5 pawn structure, and not even really playing f5 or trying to go for a kingside attack. This gives white a lot of options, and often white just goes along with the typical play on the queen side, as you can see here. Play continues, and we see a familiar friend here, right? It's penetration on the queen side. And black drifts into being worse because of the awkwardness of his pieces, right? Trying to mitigate that pressure on the queen side, his pieces wind up in awkward positions. This is a common theme in this opening. Again, we see the bishop very powerful on g2, just sitting there, and now we see that white is coming to collect now. And of course the tactics are very powerful, and they're always not always, but most of the time available because of that bishop just sitting there on g2. Knight d5. Some of you are like, well, why can't he just take? Well, he can take, but the problem here is that notice this bishop on e6 has nowhere to go. Okay, so the c takes d5. So queen b7, this is probably the idea. Offer to trade the queens. You have the rook here being attacked and this piece being attacked. But all of that is taken care of in one move, knight b4, and now the queen is on this dangerous pin here. Has to be careful. So bishop d7, queen a3, bishop f8, now bishop c3, bishop e8, knight b3. And notice how black doesn't really have the time to really get any good counterplay in because of all the pressure of white and the on the queen side. Takes, and great play with just winning this pawn by white. Knight a takes c6, knight takes, check, king h8, knight takes, and black is just lost here. Bishop takes e5, and that's all she wrote. Again, that's exploiting the fact that another pin here. So if pawn takes e5, then this bishop will drop here. Here's a game between Jan Elvist and Alexander Strapunski. This is from the 59th New York Masters in 2003. I'm showing you this game as an example of when black is a little more aggressive on the queen side and tries to get his counterplay in early. So instead of worrying about what white's doing on the queen side, he lets him expand and he just goes for his counterplay immediately. So again, you can see the setup from black and the setup from white here. Spin on the queen side, and black says, okay, I'll take that side of the board, you take your side. And so immediately we see. So this is one of the purposes of the fianchetto setup, is that it's really solid against king side attacks. That's why you notice, you'll see the fianchetto setup be most effective against Dutch defense, Leningrad, Stonewall, attacks basically where the opponent is just attacking generally on the king side. The fianchetto is a great way to protect your king. C5 by Elvis. Again, exploiting the fact that this pawn really can't be protected because of the rook on a8. But Strapunski continues with his king side ambitions. Queen g5. And I think strategically he's playing, the right way. It's just it might not work out tactically, but the idea to just continue with his counterplay, get his counterplay in is good. Although tactically left something to be desired. Because at this point he's just down a pawn pretty much. I can't even say he has any compensation. Okay. Takes, and then rook b4. Rook takes c4. Rook c4. Rook takes, and this is all favorable to black. I'm sorry, he's not down a pawn, but I meant it all for all intents and purposes due to the isolated pawn and not having counterplay. I'm sorry about that. It's getting tired. This video is a little long. Queen g5, knight d5, and here Strapunski just makes a tactical error, queen d8, and loses right on the spot to knight b6. Idea here is because black's back rank is weak. So for example, queen d1, rook d1, and then rook d8 would happen, forcing bishop f8, rook takes f8, king g7, rook d8, king f7, and then bishop h3. So this is why he had to resign at the move knight b6. Here's an example of white now, instead of playing on the queen side, he abandons that plan and he plays for a king side attack. This game is from 2011 between Grandmaster Miroshnichenko versus Vyasochin, another Grandmaster. So the game started out typical English fashion, as we've been discovering, and if you notice, we see an early e4, blocking the power of this bishop right here. So this is like the old variation we saw Botvinnik use, maybe about 20 minutes ago, which is known as the Botvinnik variation. And of course, you can play in the queen side or the king side, so it's a very flexible variation here. And now f4. And now play takes on the manner of more of like a closed Sicilian from white, whereas he concentrates his attack on the queen side, or on the king side. Sorry about that. So bishop f4, knight a6. Stiff tactical blow right here. And the idea, of course, is if queen takes, then the f7 pawn is captured. Check, king h1, so all is not lost. g6, queen h4. But like I said, the purposes of this game is just to show you that there's alternative plans, and basically know what you're doing and pick one of the plans here. So bishop f4, g5. Good move by black. Rook takes f4. So black is up a piece, but look at his pieces, the quality of his pieces, right? He has a rook on a8, bishop. It's not too effective right now on b7, and then the knight on a6 is not worthy of mention. So queen e6, desperately trying to trade off pieces here. Queen h5, of course. King f8, wanting to get the king out of danger. Rook af1, king e7, and of course he's to give up the queen. And he's trying to desperately consolidate. And after queen g7, he's forced to resign as his mate in 4. Here is another example of white attacking on the king side. This game is between Ian Nepomniachtchi, who was 27-32 at the time, versus Evgeny Nagier, who was 26-46 at the time. This was at the Moscow Super Final in 2014. Game started out as we've been discussing. And knight h4 signaling white's intention to attack on the queen side and occupy this f5 square, as you would see in the typical Ruy Lopez. Nagier is a very strong tactical player, and he opts for the move g5, which is very provocative. Basically, he's telling white to come on and bring it. More like normal is like more like knight b4, attacking the queen, queen b1, and maybe bishop c6 with some equal play, where white has the choice between playing a move like a3. Of course, he would lose his powerful bishop, or he could play a move f3, right, where he would have to block his bishop somewhat, and play would continue from there. g5 is very provocative, and he says, go ahead, take the square, queen c8, knight e4, bishop takes e4, knight takes e7, rook takes e7, and Nepo doesn't even play bishop takes h7 for good reason. I'll show you why. It's unclear after bishop takes h7. I'll show you. He played f4 here, which I like better. Bishop takes h7 check, gets the pawn, but king g7, it allows black some nice counterplay here. Bishop e4, bishop h3, and for instance, rook fe1, and then f5, and then black starts unraveling quickly after rook b8, queen d7, etc. I like f4. G takes f6, and now rook f3 with the idea of occupying the g file. King h1, f takes e5, f takes e5. Don't forget about this bishop right here. d4, opening up the position. D takes e5, d takes e5, and now black always has to keep an eye on this pawn. Bishop c5, queen c3, more pressure on the pawn. Now what to do? Rook g5, b4, and now what do you do? If you go to a7, then you have moves like rook f7, it's a good move. Rook g1. So he looks for a tactical solution, and he challenges this dangerous bishop right here. So bishop takes c6, queen takes c6, and of course notice the rook is pinned here, but there's only the rook protecting this pawn, and Nagier might have overlooked the power of this move. Nepo plays queen takes e5 check, rook takes e5, bishop takes e5 check, king g8, and now simply rook g1, and there's no answer. The only answer is the queen must give up, sacrifice itself here. So there's another example of the king side attacking potentials in this open. Okay, here is a game combining both Queenside and kingside play. This is from the Asian Continental Championship. Wen Yang versus Saskiran, Indian Grandmaster. Again, opening. And we see the expansion on the queen side. And black playing in the center. All right. So he's not so much trying to get a big king side attack, but just hold the center together in the classical fashion. Of course, anytime the center is being held together by black like that, the onus is on white to vigorously contest it and prove that it is a liability. So already we can see that, again, the power of this latent bishop here. Okay. So for instance, h3. And then black would already be in deep trouble here after, say, like knight takes e5. So knight c7, h3, bishop h5, g4, bishop g6, rook e1, and now f6 here. So at this point, white switches gears, and now he's going to try to exploit white and exploit black's weak light squares on the king side of the board. This looks pretty good for black, right? As he has three pieces all against this pawn right here. Simply knight f5 is played. Queen d7. d4. And unfortunately, white does not give black time. He's continuously harassing the center. e4, bishop takes e5. Now he takes knight d5. But instead of black just winning a pawn, it's a even trade of pawns here. And white is now up a pawn, actually. So a5, b takes a5, queen b5, rook c2. And how many times have we seen this theme where this bishop is attacked, but the attack backfires? Rook a c8, rook takes, and now tactics, knight takes h6 check, g takes, and simply queen f5. And what I like about tactics is they always boil down to the real simplest of tactics, right? The tactic can have several layers, all right? You might have to make 3 or 4 moves, but then at the end, it's just a real simple, basic tactic that you would show to a child. All right, so again, we see the flexibility in this opening where we see attack on one side, switch to the other side of the board. We saw in this video so far attacks from white on the queen side. Remember Petrosian, also Korchnoi, Botvinnik, right? We also saw Botvinnik's own special variation where he plays c4 and e4, okay, and winds up attacking on the king side of the board. We've seen that. We saw what it looks like when black responds aggressively on the king side, okay, and white's response to that. We saw black play it coy in the center. White's response to that. So hopefully this has been an hour-long video. Hopefully you've gotten it by now. If not, you're gonna have to watch the video again, and I suggest again you start playing, watch the video maybe 1 or 2 times and then start playing some speed games with this particular opening. Don't try to mix it up. Play c4 and g3, and because there's many other variations, that we could have discussed. We could have discussed c4 followed by knight c3, different systems. c4 follow, it's just the nature of the beast with this opening. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at one more game in closing. Okay, here's our final game. This is between Bu Zhengji and Tran Tuan Min. This is from 2017, the 7th HD Bank Cup. Again, our typical beginning here. E4, C4, E5, G3, C6, Knight F3, E4, Knight D4, Knight F6. And you see here, black showing a desire to build up the big center. Knight C3, Queen B6 here attacking the Knight E3. Knight a6, d3, and it's just kind of playing you don't see too often, but sometimes you will see it. And it's black going for opposite wing castling, where he will castle on the queen side. So d takes. Okay, we can't allow that to happen. Knight c takes e4. So a lot of pressure on c3. Castles. B takes, and the move d6 is played. Also possible is knight takes c3, and after b takes c3, b takes c3. White can play bishop a3, being willing to part ways with this bishop right here for long-term control over this diagonal and the dark squares in particular. Bishop takes c3 was played, b takes, and d6. Here, if knight takes c3, that would be a more costly error, because after queen c2, there's really no adequate way for the knight to escape. So d6 is played, queen c2, and now knight c5, e4, bishop e6, bishop f4. And so the solution for black to deal with this pawn is to castle queenside, and of course it's double-edged, and it definitely takes on that role of a reverse Sicilian now, whereby in your Victor Rouser attacks and your dragons, etc., whereby black is going to try to in this case attack white on the his king side, and black is going for all-out attack on the queen side. But if you're familiar with those openings, you'll see some stark differences here. One is that the B file is already open and ready to go for white. Black does not have any kind of king side attack started. There's no H pawn move to H5 or H4. The queen is not on D7 in this case, right? Ready to play the move bishop H3 to exchange off the bishop on G2. Instead, the queen is on B6, a very vulnerable square. So this transposition is a little suspect. It was difficult as far as finding the solution to how to protect the D6 pawn, but maybe just rook D8 at the end of the day, and still look to castle on the queen side. Okay, or maybe even queen c7, as suspicious as it might look. But castles, to me, brings white into a much superior position. Rook fd1 is played, piling up here, right? And now queen a6 moves the queen off, the open file. And there's some kind of vague threat here. It's not really, because, of course, what happened in the game. Knight takes e6, knight takes e6, bishop d6, just simply winning the pawn. Queen takes c4. So here's the idea of black. Okay, so he's just not losing a pawn. Rook a b1. Now he plays knight c7. And then bishop h3, and black resigned. You might be wondering, why did he resign? If you want, you could pause the video and try to figure that out for yourself. So I'll give you 2 seconds to do that. 1, 2. Okay, the reason why black resigned is because his queen is trapped here in this position. Okay, the idea is bishop h3, as you see in the game, and if king b8, then just simply rook d4. And where's the queen going to go? Queen a6, rook a4 for one variation. Instead of king b8, if knight e6, same thing, rook d4, queen a6, rook a4. And so this is why black resigned after bishop h3. So that's been about an hour, a little over an hour. I hope you enjoyed that video. I hope you got some of the main concepts of the English opening. This is just one line of the English, uh, beginning with a C4, E5, and G3. English is a vast labyrinth of transpositional possibilities. Like I said at the beginning of the video, you can end up in Kings, Indians, Nimzo Indians, Slavs, all type of different scenarios depending on what black plays. However, I hope that this video equips you with enough to get started in the English opening, and that it improves your chess as a result. It's a very fun opening to play, but like I said, there's a lot of room and plans for both sides, and this is why you typically see very strong players and a lot of older players adapt the English opening too, because a lot of younger players rely on memorization and of opening lines and theory. And the English is a good and safe way to get players out of theory, but yet maintain the complexity of the game. And the more complex the game is, and the better it is. Not that the more complex the game is, but the English relies more on ideas, right, than specific concrete variation, so to speak, and memorization of lines. So usually the more experienced player is going to be more familiar with the general themes and ideas in the positions than, say, like a younger player who's just like booked up in theory of, say, like the Marshall Gambit or something, or Roy Lopez, where they might have memorized the first 15, 20 moves in the opening and don't even have to think. The English kind of forces you, to consider ideas more than, variations. So I hope I explained it well enough, and good luck. Let me know how you do with the English. Like I said, the normal formula with this, again, is you start playing some blitz games. Don't worry about trying to remember lines and stuff. Leave the theory alone. Just get the ideas, and hopefully you pick that up from this video. But I suggest you play minute games, just bullet games, and 3-minute, 5-minute games. Just play a bunch of those and just get the general feel of the position. Also, don't try to play all the different plans of white. I showed you where he attacks on the king side. I showed you the Botvinnik variation. I showed you where white attacks on the center. I would choose like one. I'm sorry, not the center, the queen side. I would choose one or the other. I would either play that Botvinnik variation when I'm playing C4, D3, and E4, and follow up by F4 and stuff like that, and playing in a matter of closed Sicilian, or I would play like Korchnoi and Petrosian, where they played A3, B4, B5, try to knock the knight off C6, attack the E pawn, and eventually penetrate on the queen side. It's more positional in nature, but I would choose one and not try to master both right away. Choose one or the other, and depending on your chess personality, and go from there. And again, let me know how you do. Please check my links below. Please support my channel. That's just like an hour of just straight, free content. Yeah, please donate if you can. Click on the links below. There's like videos, DVDs, etc., books that's related to the opening that we discussed. And I would like some feedback. And if there's certain openings or variation that you want me to do the same thing to, just let me know and I'll get right on it. All right, I'll see you guys soon. Good luck with your progress.